Right, everybody, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are going to have a look through our SDP process amongst various other topics this afternoon. And again, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. To cover off the introductions of the people we have on the call from Bloom today, we have myself, I'm Kevin Berry, the Finance Director at Bloom, and we have Ben Dara, the Provide2 Product Owner. We have Anthony Davies, one of our commercial managers. We have Paul Mander, our procurement director, and Alex Wright hosting things for us today, who's our senior marketing exec. So the plan for today is to give you guys an overview of our service delivery plan process, or SDP process, you might hear it referred to throughout. This will include myself primarily running through the process at a high level to give you guys an overview of the overall downstream process we have at Bloom, diving specifically then into the service delivery plan element of that. And Ben will then take us through a demonstration of what that looks like from the system, the screens you guys see, and he will talk you through what buttons to press and how that process works from a process point of view. We will then pause for a Q&A to cover off that first part of the webinar, and we will answer as many questions. There should be a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you want to pop any questions in there throughout. At the couple of pauses we've got in this presentation, we will answer the questions then. If there are any questions we don't get to, we will answer them offline afterwards, but we should be able to get through the majority. So please, as I say, do pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom. Anthony, our commercial manager, will then take us through commercialization in the public sector, and Paul, our procurement director, will talk more broadly about the Bloom offering and other ways and other opportunities you can get involved with via Bloom. And then again, we will stop at the end to wrap up a final Q&A. So moving into the overall downstream process, to give you guys an idea of where the service delivery plan sits in that. This is set up from the point of view of a project that is run on our Provide2 platform on our NEPRO framework, which is primarily 99% of everything. But if you do have a slight variation or something else that you work on with us, feel free to reach out separately and we can cover anything specific off that doesn't get addressed today. And this is assuming you've been accredited, you've won the work, and you've got a signed engaged work order. And you're now at the point where you are delivering on that project and you've reached your first milestone and you are trying to invoice and recover the monies related to that. So the first step of that process is you submit the service delivery plan in our Provide2 system. And again, this is the main topic today, and the point that Ben will show you in a bit more detail in a couple of slides time. But this is the part where you enter in all the details of the milestone that you've been delivering against. You attach any requirements or any reports that you're required for the buyer to review at that point in time, and you indicate the value that should be the same value that was agreed in your work order that you are looking to invoice against. And you enter all of that detail into our Provide2 platform, as I say, and you submit that. And that then goes off to the buyer for approval. So the buyer will essentially review everything you've added to your submission, and they will look at the value, and they will look at the detail and basically either agree or approve or reject that submission to say that they agree with what you're saying has been delivered. And it's really that approval point of the process that triggers all the payment terms and the invoicing that we see. So once they've pressed that approval button, 3 invoices are raised at that point in time. So Bloom will invoice the buying authority for the agreed amount. We will also raise the self-billed invoice, which is effectively your invoice as the supplier to us as Bloom for the same amount that's submitted on the service delivery plan. So that value that you enter there is really key to that process. And we also raise our invoice to you for our management fee in relation to that charge. So that approval and invoicing process is quite simultaneous, and that is really the key point to the downstream and finance part of this process. From there, generally speaking, we have a payment process where the suppliers are usually paid within 30 days or 14 days from the receipt of funds. at Bloom from the buying authority. So we do try to keep this whole cycle as short as possible to support you guys in the delivery of the work and keep this cash cycle as short as we can. So diving into the service delivery plan slightly more in depth from my point of view, some of the key points within this, really the submission you're making should, in the majority of circumstances, be in line with the work order you agreed in terms of the value and the actual milestone that is being submitted. The value that you guys enter here on this submission is always net of VAT. And again, you'll see some of these fields as we go through the demonstration with Ben next. Our management fee also is calculated against the fee which is submitted here, and it is based on 5% of that value that is entered in to provide to as the billable amount. So we will move into the demonstration with Ben, where we can now look at some of these things in more detail. And just for everybody's reference, actually, I didn't mention at the start, but these slides and the recording will be available to all of you guys who dialed into the session today. So no need to furiously take notes or worry too much about this demonstration. It will be available to watch back afterwards as well. So Ben, if you want to now take us through a demo, and then we will move into a Q&A relating to this first part of the session.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So as Kevin said, I'm going to show you from the point of logging into your Provide2 account, finding the project, and then submitting your update. So there's a couple of ways and a couple of easy ways to do that really from the dashboard. So from logging in, we have our sourcing navigation on the left-hand side here, and we can access our project level information at various steps. What we want to be looking at is the point at which the contract has been signed, and after that is when we build out that service delivery plan, the milestone plan, against which you'll be submitting your update. So if we go down to contracts and my contracts, we're going to see a list of all of those contracts, or from the dashboard on the quick links, we can go straight into my contracts that way. This is going to give you an overview of all of your contracts that you have had in the past and are currently live with Bloom. So you will see a contract ID, the title of the contract and the project, start and end dates, and the status. So that might be awaiting signature if it's a contract just waiting that final step, active, expired, or terminated as well, the status as you may see in there. To access, then you're going to click in. This gives you an overview of the contract and the container information that sits alongside it. So we've got various bits of information in here, and you can actually access the contract itself within the master documentation area. But we're actually looking at to go into our service delivery plan where those milestones are. So on details, we then go into our actions, and this is going to give us the milestones for that project, aligned to the payment schedule as you will have submitted at the point of tender, and which has then been approved to go out and build the work order. So if I organize by end date using the header on the right hand side there, that's going to give me an ordered perspective of the milestones for that project. So at this point, we may have various types of project here. If it's an outcomes or deliverables based project, we're going to have specific milestones. It may be that you are billing on a monthly cycle. So we have monthly milestones against which you will bill for work delivered. Or it may be more of a call-off type arrangement where you have one milestone against which you will submit your billing information incrementally as you've delivered elements of the work. Within here, for this example, this is a milestone-based project. So you will see that we have a number of milestones in there. There's 4 milestones, but actually for each of those milestones, we do have 2 lines. So we have what we call the SDP line, the service delivery element of it. This is your line, the submission line, where you'll go in and submit your billing information and project update. And then we have an approval line. This is where the buyer will then go in and approve or reject your submission at the point after you have submitted. We also have along here a status. So the completed elements are those that will have changed from in progress to completed when you've submitted your update. And then same thing will happen once you've submitted that update, buyer is notified, they'll come in and approve, and that approval line will then change to completed as well once they've done that. So in terms of the generation of that invoice, for a milestone, once those pair of lines is both in the status of completed, that is when your invoice will generate and the payment terms, as Kevin had mentioned, will begin. And we can also see here along on the right-hand side, a start and end date. These are the dates that, again, will correspond to the information you submitted at the point of tender, alongside that payment schedule information. So these will be drawn through and will go out to build those end dates, those milestone dates. So in terms of submitting then, we can see the status of the project. So we've reached down to the point of implementation within this test project, and we are in progress, so it's waiting for submission. You just need to click into that milestone, and that's going to bring up what we call the collaboration area. This is the form into which you can then submit your financial information and your project update. The first section, so we're split into 3 sections. We've got financial information, the invoicing, and then the project status. Key information at the top here is that financial information. So we can see the PO line description, which again corresponds to your payment schedule. We can see the total value that was agreed at the start of the project within that payment schedule and signed off in the work order. And we can see the remaining value available. That is obviously that total value minus anything that has already been billed against that line. And you can repeatedly bill against the line if it is if that's required for the nature of the project. So in terms of then submitting, as we currently do, we're editing the values within that form. That's going to open the form up for editing. For this project, for this milestone line here, we can see the remaining value is actually 7,000. So we've already submitted 1,000 against that line. And then to input your invoice value, we are inputting into the invoice value line here. So obviously that needs to be either equal to or below the remaining value available for that to process through smoothly. If it is above that, when the approval comes through, it will go into a pending state, and we'll be back in touch with you to query that submission and whether why it's above the remaining value line, and if there's changes or a change control that needs to be applied to the project. So this is where we're inputting that net figure, so excluding that, but we'll have that management fee, the 5% applied to it at the point of further down the line when invoicing and payment is made. We also then have the ability to include any expenses within that. So if you do have expenses to include as well, you can click yes and input your expense value. And if you need to, you can also attach a copy of your receipts. The final section then is the project status. So an update on to confirm you've delivered all the work as expected, status of the project for that piece of work, whether on track, minor delays or major delays, and whether there's been a change in that status since the previous submission. So no change, better or worse. And then finally, we are going to input what we have completed for this piece of work, and then what we are going to or intend to complete for the next piece of work that will be submitted for. At that point, you've input all your values. You then need to go back up to the top of the form and click save. That's going to save the information within the body of the form. You can open it up and edit it as well if you need to check. So check the information within there. And then really importantly, at this point, that line will still be in progress to then submit that through to the buyer and send an email to them. So an email will automatically be driven off the back. We're going to complete that action. That will then change it to completed. An email, will be sent to the buyer, and they will then be able to go in and approve that line. As soon as they do approve that, the approval line will then change to completed. And as said, we will then proceed with the invoicing process. Once we have submitted that, or you have submitted that, sorry, in terms of your update, if that is not approved by the buyer, we do then have a process of chasing and getting in touch with that buyer to make sure they are approving in a timely fashion. So as soon as that happens, if that isn't approved over a period of days, we will then chase them to ensure that is done. If you have then only a partial invoice against that, and there's remaining value on the line, so you're not submitting for the full value of that line, as soon as the invoice is generated, that line will then be reopened, and you will then be able to go in and submit again against that value, and the remaining value will drop down accordingly, depending on the billable amount. So I'm going to pause there and see if you've got any questions on that bit of the process?
Yes, so as we said, if you do have any questions at this point, please please pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will try and address those now for you. So we don't have anything to answer live at the moment. Oh, actually, we've just got one come through. Thanks very much, Jason. So we have a specialist IT recruitment agency, and they're wondering how they can best make the value of our services, and could they bill weekly? For example, as a contractor might want to be paid weekly, and how would that work? So if I take the first part of that question, and then Paul or Anthony, you may be able to help us out with this one. So in terms of the payment, there are standard payment terms across our supplier agreements, which are 13 days or 40 days, 30 days from the approval point or 14 days from the receipt from a buyer. So we don't currently have a setup for weekly payment terms. Having said that, if there is an outcomes-based approach to the type of work you're describing, we can set up kind of weekly milestones that would be within that, and they could be called off on a weekly basis, and then once you get past the initial term, the payments would then flow weekly from that point. Anthony, do you want to comment, or Paul comment on how this kind of process fits or doesn't fit within our current model?
I suppose from perspective, it's an option within the buyer's remit to decide that they want to go through with weekly milestones. As I think you've kind of alluded to there, Kev, a little bit, it can be a bit clunkier there because there's lots more administration floating around in the system, etc. A bit more difficult to keep track of in terms of the invoice flow on all parties, really. So I'd always recommend more of a monthly process basis to keep that level of that to really the most appropriate for everybody, really. But I understand that some cases that that is a challenge in terms of cash flow for our supply chain as well. So it's about finding the best happy medium that works for all parties, I would say there.
Yeah, we do try to work our best within the framework to meet the needs of the supply base we have. So if there was anything specific in that question, Jason, we didn't cover, we will flash up some contact details at the end. Feel free to drop us a note, and we'll pick that up separately. We do have a question as well from Andy. Will the remaining value update, and when is it updated? So it does update, and it should update each time a service delivery plan is approved. Ben, that is correct?
Yeah. So as soon as it's approved, the invoice will generate straight away within 2 to 5 minutes. As soon as that invoice is generated, the remaining value will update. And at that point, if there's remaining value on the lines as well, the lines will be reopened, so you can then submit against that line again if the project's set up in that way and that's how you intend to use it. We can also disseminate the remaining value across future milestones as well. So if it's done on a monthly cycle and you haven't billed for the full value on that line, that remaining value can then be moved down to further milestones, so that value can then be billed against in future milestones within the project.
Okay, if that's it for now, we will, as I say, there's another Q&A point at the end of the presentation. So anything that comes in between now and the end about this topic or the following topics with Anthony and Paul, we will cover off some more questions at the end. And as I say, we will flash up some contact details as well, should anybody need to get in touch with us afterwards. So Anthony, at that point, I am going to hand over to you to talk about commercialization.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you. Thank you for the intro. My name's Anthony Davies, and I'm a commercial manager here at Bloom Procurement Services, and I work with local authority, education, housing association, and National Health Service sectors, predominantly in the Midlands and South West. Today's market insight is going to focus and explore the growth of commercialisation in the public sector, the scope of that opportunity that represents, and the work Bloom and the supply chain are undertaking this, with examples of how Bloom are working in this area. Commercialisation in the public sector is not a new thing, but what we are seeing and continuing to see is the public sector becoming more and more inventive and entrepreneurial in delivering of those services. I'm predominantly focusing this session around the ways public sector body may reduce costs or make revenue, although this is not always the primary aim or only aim of a public sector commercialisation project. So in understanding commercialisation in the public sector, I think it's really important to focus just a little bit of time to focus on what those macro factors are in the environment that make commercialisation successful. And those are really the size of the opportunity itself. So in the public procurement, estimated that £220 billion a year is spent on goods and services within public procurement as a whole. And this really gives public sector the opportunity to be an intelligent client. There are large scale projects and partnerships, and these give the ability for suppliers to break down some of those barriers and demonstrating ways of overcoming barriers to delivering successful public sector commercialisation projects. There's knowledge exchange in that now more than ever, there's an abundance of collaboration platforms such as social media, webinars such as our own here, cloud computing, etc., which makes it really easy to find like-minded people and like-minded organisations to exchange data and collaborate with and test hypotheses about how public sector might go about things differently in the future. And finally, SMEs. The government itself, on the other end of the scale to the large sector projects and partnerships, the government itself see the SME market as a huge potential for our future growth. And the UK wants to be seen as the preferred place to do business in that SME space. And that's really been evidenced recently in the government green paper on procurement following Brexit and how public procurement regulations may change as a result of that. So there are numerous forms of commercialisation in the public sector, and this slide here is really here to demonstrate the potential complexity of commercialisation output vehicles. I'm not going to go through all of these in any detail because they're very complex from one end of the scale to another, but what this slide is here to do is to demonstrate the unique nature of a public sector procurement project in the commercialisation field, from anything from companies and shared services all the way through to special purpose vehicles and special project vehicles, where suppliers come together deliberately just to source that one need. And really what I want to do here as well is just highlight some of those areas that are ripe for commercialisation in the public sector. So talking about things such as HR, customer service, building control and back office services, and local authorities themselves, of course, have a wide range of other services that may be suitable depending on the context and if handled sensitively. So for example, financial services, property, care homes, school meals, legal services, waste, and some transport functions. So those really is a broad range of opportunities the public sector are looking at for those kind of commercialisation. I thought it might also be useful to have a look at the life cycle of commercialisation projects, and what I've got on the screen here is a cradle to grave effect of how commercialisation comes into life. So all the way from initial inception, kind of the idea stage, somebody sitting in a public sector office thinking, right, we need to do something about something, all the way through to feasibility studies of how that might happen, the cost benefit analysis of those options, towards business case and governance of a preferred option, all the way through to legal preparation for that commercial relationship, including any procurement, the project management of how that all happens and all that works from setting it up and from inception to delivery, and the delivery itself and the service assessment to make sure that things are going appropriately and make any improvements that might be needed. all the way through to service close down. So things like legal reviews, lessons learned, and realisation of those benefits. So to demonstrate to a public sector body whether that commercialisation project has worked or not in realising those benefits that were in the inception. All the way back through to actually saying the commercialisation project didn't work, and then insourcing that activity back, whether that be through political means or through those commercial benefits not being realised successfully. And these, of course, are all opportunities for the private sector to get involved with public sector. The public sector will require support on a number of these aspects throughout the life cycle. I'm just going to focus now a little bit on what Bloom has been doing in this area as well recently. So on NEPRO 3, this category of commercialisation came in NEPRO's framework, NEPRO 3 framework, as a new category back in September 2019. And since then, Bloom has facilitated 22 public sector commercialisation projects worth £3.892 million of budgeted spend. We've got 11 live long-term projects, which are either expiring later this year or all the way through to 2024. And of those, what might be surprising, and this actually surprised me a little bit, is it's not all focused in the local government area. We've actually had one project in Blue Light, one in housing, 2 in the NHS, 3 in central government, and 4 in education as well. So that's surprising how the majority is local government, but I would never have expected the education sector to come perhaps second in those lines of commercialisation projects that we have. So that's just a really interesting insight into where these projects are arriving from, where they're coming from in the marketplace. And finally, I just wanted to touch on a couple of examples, a couple of case studies where we've helped and are helping our clients at the moment with commercialisation projects. So I've got 3 on the board here. So we actually helped, Bloom helped procure a consortium approach between a local authority, Virgin Orbit, and Goon Hilly Earth Station for the UK's first horizontal spaceport. Which it's kind of big, and this actual project itself was looking at 3 initial stages. So it was looking at a discovery phase where the local authority really wanted initial options appraisal on what options they had to deliver this service, a definition phase in taking that preferred option and then developing that commercial model to the point of it being feasible, and then developing that through viability analysis to actually get into a stage gate where the public procurement, public purse could say, yes, we want to go forward with this. So that's a really interesting one. The second one we've got here is to do with catering services. And actually what we found is with this one, we were supporting, and our supply chain was supporting a local authority with a traded service for its in-house school meals provision. So the local authority itself set up a company in its own right to provide services to their own schools in their region. However, as with public procurement, they were under competition from external parties in this context, and therefore needed their own bid writing support to ensure that they could make a good business case to the schools in their region of why they should go in-house with a local authority service rather than to an external party. And finally, we're recently involved with an NHS project, and this is a retail design and catering consultancy project where we have a redesign of hospital premises for maximisation of retail revenue, and this includes interior design and the catering offering itself. This is a current live project that we have on our books at the moment that we're really excited to help the supply chain and help the NHS in delivering those maximisation of those benefits in a cost basis. So I'm going to just finish there. I hope you found that useful. And I'm going to pass over to, I think I'm passing over to Paul now. Is that correct?
It is. Thank you, Anthony. Thanks.
You're very welcome.
It's really interesting to just hear about some of the kind of projects that Bloom deliver on a day-to-day basis. What kind of Anthony's described there is just some of the sort of innovation that we're able to offer the public sector through suppliers like yourselves, who have various different specialisms, various kind of niche skills that are required and accessed by the public sector through Bloom. So what I kind of wanted to talk about briefly today is just a few of those kind of opportunities, other ways to engage with Bloom, and also just to give you some sense about some of the additional opportunities offered through the NEPRO framework, which is where we do the majority of our work. So Bloom as an organisation, we work with over 350 public sector organisations across all of the areas that kind of Anthony described, and then some more as well. So not only can we kind of support you to get in and involved with other public sector buying organisations and public sector bodies, we can also kind of offer additional routes to market. So Bloom are named as approved suppliers on the Management Consulting Framework, MCF, for education. We're also on the Management Consulting Framework 2 for business consultancy, and also for procurement and supply chain consultancy as well. And what that means is that we are notified of new opportunities that come out via that route, and we are often looking for partners to bid for work that comes through that route. So what we do is we interrogate every opportunity that comes through to see if we have suppliers who are willing and able to kind of fulfill the requirements, the outcomes that are required by that particular project. A slightly different model, because actually Bloom in that instance are competing with others on MCF and MCF2, but it does give access to our marketplace. It gives anyone who's not on those agreements the opportunity to bid for opportunities through that route. So we are kind of looking at how we are smarter around that to give people kind of foresight wherever we can to those opportunities. But also, if there are projects that you are aware of that are coming through one of those routes, we can partner with you to give you access to those opportunities. So I'm more than happy kind of to take calls from people, any of you who have opportunities that you think you may wish to access. Alongside that, from a NEPRO 3 perspective, which, as I say, is we've talked a lot about the kind of SDP process that aligns with NEPRO 3. We also have a significant amount of flexibility in that framework. So for us, we're absolutely about promoting innovation in the marketplace and sharing that with the public sector. So if there is an opportunity to look at additional subcategories within the NEPRO framework, then we're happy to kind of hear that from our marketplace and our suppliers, because what we can do is we work really closely with the North East Procurement Organisation, who own and manage the NEPRO framework. And the framework itself allows us flexibility to add additional subcategories to that framework. So what that means is we can effectively tailor that framework to meet new requirements as they come out of the public sector. One of the reasons for doing that was, and I think we've probably all experienced this in the past, is frameworks that are not able to change generally don't get used. And because we have a lot of breadth of categories and subcategories, and we have the opportunity to do that, it means that the framework gets used more. So we have much better dialogue, much more kind of interaction with both our public sector buyers, but also NEPO as the public buying organisation who leads and manages that framework. So a good example of that, and you will be hearing kind of imminently, is around the launch of consultancy around PFIs. So actually, we know that that's an area that is being looked at by government. There've been lots of recommendations by the National Audit Office around that. And actually what we're able to do is to tailor that framework to meet the needs of the public sector. So that's just one example of how that can work. But if there are other areas, other other delivery that you are doing as suppliers, actually you can lead that conversation. Talk to us about what it is you're doing, whether that's something that is very niche, something that is very innovative. Talk to us about how best we can deliver that through the NEPRO framework, and that is in everybody's interest to do that, both from the public sector to Bloom to yourselves as our supply chain partners. And the final thing I kind of wanted to mention was just around social value as well, which for us is really important to us as an organisation. Social value forms, is very much at the heart of everything that we do. There is a lot of discussion through central government around mandating the social value through every competition that comes out. And that's also been kind of pushed through to wider government, not just central government. And something that we'd love to hear about, kind of what you're doing from a social value perspective. We'd love to talk to you about kind of how we can help you to incorporate that into any bids that you put forward through Bloom as well. And you will start to see that over the coming weeks and months. And just a final thing really, which was just to pick up on one of the questions that was asked earlier about kind of weekly payments. I think for us, the most important thing is that everything we do is outcome based. And, actually how that is structured is part of the competition that we would run and part of the procurement process. So as Anthony kind of described, actually it's all in the setup. So actually, if we're talking about kind of weekly milestones, then that's absolutely fine, but it absolutely has to be based on the outcomes that the public sector are looking to achieve. So I hope that's been helpful. I'm happy to take questions. Obviously, there's some details here around getting back in touch, but I will hand back over to Kevin. And thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much for that, Paul and Anthony. Yes, if you do have questions, as we said, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to add those in. Just to cover off a question for Rachel that came in just at the end of that first session. Just to clarify the payment terms that we mentioned before. So our standard term with suppliers is either 30 days from that point of service delivery plan approval, or 14 days on Bloom receiving funds from the buying authority. And the term is actually whichever is later of the two. So generally speaking, it is 30 days is the longest you wait. So hopefully that clarifies things, but certainly if not, as we say, please get in touch. But it's, as I say, 30 days from approval or 14 days after Bloom receives funds from the buying authority, whichever is the later of the two. We do have another question in around the Management Consultant 3 framework, Paul, and whether Bloom will be looking for an opportunity to bid on against that. Do you want to take that question, Paul?
I can neither confirm nor deny that we have bid for MCF3. So you can read into that as you will. And there's a couple of other questions I think that have come in around this. Actually, one more about new opportunities. So Rob, I'm happy to kind of have a conversation about that, just to kind of talk about how we can kind of, and this is something that actually we're trying to get better at as an organisation. So actually, I kind of welcome your views around how we can communicate that with you. We're considering that internally. We've kind of changed slightly our kind of bid team, and we're looking at kind of ways in which we will communicate that out to our supply chain. And there was a question about adding project categories to the NEPRO framework, which from our perspective, the way that the framework was let, there are 20 categories at a top level which do not change. They are the scope and breadth of the agreement, but within that there are 340 subcategories, and those subcategories can be tweaked based on market needs, and that's something that Bloom will agree with NEPO, and that is formally agreed as part of effectively an amendment to the contract, and then once that's agreed, then we would launch it with our public sector buyers, and we would also communicate that with our supply chain as well.
Thanks very much, Paul. And as Paul said, that would need to be within the scope of the original 20 heading categories. we do not have any more open questions. So thank you very much, everybody, for dialing in with us today. As I say, the recording and the slides will be made available. And if you do have anything else you want to reach out to us about, please get in touch on the details that are currently on screen. But outside of that, thank you very much for joining us, and we will be in touch with the next of our webinar series as and when details are created internally. But thanks for now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.